Turkey, a jewel of the Mediterranean, a rising, buzzing economy, attracting tourists from all over the world. But it is also a leading jailer of journalists. I'm Selin Girit, and I'm back in Turkey to find out why.
Türkiye'de benim yaptığım habercilik bir terör faaliyetiymiş gibi gösterilmek isteniyor.
Covering the news has rarely been so difficult.
The police has just announced that they will be using tear gas, warning people to disperse immediately.
The authorities here do not always want people to know what's going on.
The government is tilting towards authoritarianism and seems to be less and less tolerant of any kind of criticism, and there are no checks and balances.
The Turkish government denies any press censorship. Instead, the Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdoğan blames the foreign media for misrepresenting Turkey.
Hadi bakalım BBC bunu da gizle. CNN bunu da gizle. Reuters bunu da gizle.
Dökülen kanlarımız sonra elanaklanır.
It's October 29th and the annual Republic Day parade in Istanbul. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of modern Turkey, called it the biggest festival. The country has just marked the 90th anniversary of the Republic.
People gathered here are not necessarily political, families mostly, but there are still divisions amongst the crowd here. Some are pro-government, some are anti-government. They all are passionate about the future of Turkey, but with very different views of what that future should be.
Across town, that passion is bubbling over. An anti-government protest has attracted a heavy police presence. The journalists here seem to be free to do their job. But are they? Last June, a small environmental protest to save Gezi Park in central Istanbul evolved into wider opposition against the government. It spread across the country as police used force to clear the crowds. The protests grew day by day, and the violence continued into the night. But the mainstream Turkish news channels showed anything but this breaking news. One had a discussion about schizophrenia, another a film about Hitler.
Onlar ilerliyor.
And CNN Turk chose penguins. Meanwhile, local journalists were trying to report on the protests. Some were caught up in the police crackdown.
Nasıl oldu? O günü biraz anlatabilir misiniz?
Ahmet Şık is a widely respected and well-known investigative reporter. He's convinced that he was targeted by the police while covering the clashes last summer.
Hemen arkamızda polis vardı. Polislerin bulunduğu yerden ilk gaz bombası kafama geldi. 50 atılan gaz bombalarından birisi. Bir darbe aldım, hemen kafamı tuttum ve her tarafından kan fışkırmaya başladı.
Ahmet was hospitalized but returned to cover the protests a few days later. And together with other journalists, he says he was targeted again by the police.
Ve tabii gelen tazyikli sudan etkilenmeyeyim diye ben de sırtımı döndüm ve o sırada kafama bir darbe aldım ama şansıma miğferim vardı yani. Elime attım, bir çukur var. O olmasaydı miğfer, ben kesinlikle şu an konuşamayacağımızı düşünüyordum yani. Hadi koş önce, koş.
Ahmet Şık has not only been targeted physically. In 2011, he was jailed for a year.
Abla gel buraya. Gel. Yazılım aşamasında taslak halinde olan bir kitapla örgüt propagandası yapmakla suçlanıyorum. Bundan daha komik bir şey olamaz.
The Prime Minister, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, talking about Ahmet's book, said, "Books can be more dangerous than bombs."
Sahip çıkıyor muyuz?
This pro-government rally was held in Istanbul, just a day after Gezi Park was cleared of the anti-government protesters. It showed the huge support the Prime Minister has in the country. He has won 3 consecutive elections. Almost 50% voted for him the last time round.
İstanbul.
He was clearly furious with the international media for their coverage of the anti-government protests.
Hadi bakalım BBC bunu da gizle. CNN bunu da gizle. Reuters bunu da gizle. Bu millet sizin dünyaya tanıttığınız millet değil.
His criticisms became personal too. I'd been sent by the BBC from London to cover the protests.
Allah aşkına.
In a speech to his party's MPs, the Prime Minister took time to single me out.
Bir insan kendi ülkesine karşı böyle bir komplonun içinde yer alabilir mi? Buna gazetecilik denebilir mi? Buna basın özgürlüğü denebilir mi?
It was my reporting from this park that attracted such official condemnation.
When the main protests in Gezi Park were broken up, people started gathering in their local parks, like this one. I used to live close to here, and my grandparents would bring me to this park when I was a kid.
At one protest here, I tweeted what the speakers were saying. One woman called for an economic boycott for 6 months to get the government to listen. I quoted her in a tweet. That quote was ascribed to me by the mayor of the Turkish capital Ankara, as if I had called for a boycott.
He started a Twitter campaign against me, calling me a British agent and a traitor, which was followed by thousands of rape and death threats.
İsmi Selin Girit bu hanımefendinin. Aynen attığı tweet şu. Bir İngiltere'nin BBC'nin Türkiye muhabiri olan kişi benim tepkimden dolayı gitti birisi provokasyon yaptı, vurdu.
Allah korusun. Allah.
Şimdi vurabilir. Niye vurabilir biliyor musun? Sırf Türkiye'yi karıştırmak için yapabilir.
Evet.
Yani masum bir kadın değil. Böyle birisi.
Months later, some journalists in Turkey are still being intimidated by officials. There seems to be a culture of intolerance to uncomfortable truths.
Tamam o zaman.
Ismail Saymaz, an investigative journalist, is working on a very sensitive story. He is covering the death of 19-year-old Ali İsmail Korkmaz, allegedly killed by the police during last summer's protests.
Polis nerede şimdi?
Polis burada, bu sokağın girişinde ve Ali İsmail'in geldiğini bunlara haber veriyor. Devirip yere düşürüyorlar. Şunlar polis. Gelecek olan 2 tane geliyorlar ve bunlar burada tekmelemeye başlıyorlar. Bunlar uzaklaşıyor, bunlar vurmaya devam ediyor polisler. Sonra Ali İsmail'i öyle bırakıyorlar.
These pictures were recovered after an attempt was made to delete them.
Şimdi bu polis tekrar geliyor. Ali İsmail yerde yatıyor o esnada. Sen hala gitmedin mi falan diyor. 1 tekme. 2. tekme. Bu da 3. tekme. Sonra Ali İsmail toparlanmaya çalışıyor ve ardından gitmeye çalışıyor ve uzaklaşıyor.
The next day, Ali İsmail lapses into a coma and dies a month later. I traveled to Antakya in the south of Turkey to meet Ali İsmail's close-knit family.
Yani ben Ali'nin bırakıp gideceğini hiç beklemiyordum. Ali dirençli bir çocuktu. Hayatı seven bir çocuktu.
İnanıyorduk ya yanına
Ali
geldiğimizde
inanıyorduk.
iyi olacağına
38 gün.
inanıyorduk. Yani içimizde böyle kötü bir düşünce yoktu böyle. Çünkü insanın bir canı bir parçası nasıl kötüyü düşünür.
Kabullenemiyoruz Ali'nin bir daha böyle gelmeyeceğini.
Buyurun Ali'nin odası.
Gürkan, his brother and a lawyer, shows me around.
Ali burada yatardı. Ben de evlenmeden önce burada yatıyordum. Aynı odada yatıyordum.
Aynı odada kalıyordunuz.
Hatta kışın
şeyleri tek battaniyede örtülmek için
Yatakları birleştiriyordunuz.
uyuyakalana kadar sohbet ederdik. Kendi sürekli Eskişehir Valiliği ilk açıklamasında arkadaşları dövmüştür şeklinde beyanda bulundu. Ondan sonra Türk polisi öyle bir şey yapmaz şeklinde beyanlar da bulundu. Medya bunu bir gerçeği servis ettiği zaman bunun devlet adamları tarafından desteklenmesi gerekiyor. Medyanın, basının bu baskısı olmasaydı bu olayda diğer arkadaşları dövmüş diye kapanırdı.
After investigating this story, Ismail received an email from the governor of Eskişehir, the city where the attack took place. The email was sent at 4 in the morning.
Oğlum İsmail yine rahat durmuyorsun diye başlayıp adi, şerefsiz ve benzeri hakaretlerin sıralandığı, ölümü hatırlatan bir mail olduğunu gördüm. Önce inanmadım.
Ismail checked with the governor whether he had actually sent this message. He had.
Çünkü böyle bir şeyle ilk kez karşılaştım. Daha farklı yöntemler izlenir diye düşünüyordum. Böyle mail gönderme gibi bir yol izlendiğini hiç görmemiştim.
Despite the threats, Ismail Saymaz is determined to continue reporting the story.
Değiyor çünkü bu ülkede, en azından Eskişehir'de bir gencin daha bu şekilde öldürülmesinin önüne geçme ihtimali olduğu için değiyor. En azından bir başka vali, bir başka gazeteciyi kendi memuru gibi zannetmesin diye değiyor.
Turkey's Union of Journalists says that in the last few months, more than 200 journalists have been sacked or forced to resign for covering issues that the government finds sensitive. And there appears to be a creeping culture of self-censorship in Turkey. In a cafe in central Istanbul, I meet two journalists who were both sacked from their jobs with pro-government papers.
My editors made it very clear that the pressure was coming not just from the owner of the newspaper, but from the government as well.
How difficult is it to work in such an environment?
You will hardly see a single serious investigative piece on corruption, which I'm fairly sure exists, absolutely.
Yes.
But no one dares go there.
That's as soon as you enter into, proper investigative journalism in this country, you touch a lot of nerves. Not only about the government or bureaucracy, but also the company that owns the asset or outlet that you're working in.
Even here, there's disagreement about what journalism is.
There must be a division between activism and journalism. A lot of our colleagues in this country are unfortunately blending political activism and journalism.
Surely militancy of the kind, advocacy journalism certainly doesn't warrant somebody ending up in jail for
Absolutely.
that. To say that Turkey is the biggest jailer of journalists in the world is a fair description.
Across town, at Turkey's biggest courthouse, the authorities make the same distinctions, classifying campaigning challenging journalism as unlawful political activism. Foreign observers say this is a political trial.
That's what the Prime Minister says as well. He says, of course we don't imprison journalists because they are doing their jobs. No, we imprison them because they are political activists. But they are all in prison because they have done their job.
More than 20 journalists are on trial here today. The Journalists' Union has called a silent protest in support of them and their families.
There are just a few people here, not a great bunch, and this is another sign that the unions are weak. And this shows that the journalists in Turkey have to fight their own corners.
7 of the journalists on trial here receive life sentences. Not for their journalism, the judges say, but terrorism. There are many more journalists whose trials are taking place elsewhere. Little wonder that some believe sweeping anti-terror laws are being used against journalists who stray too close to the red lines in Turkish politics. I'm on my way to the Asian side of Istanbul. I'm going to meet the sister of Hüseyin Deniz. Hüseyin is a Kurdish journalist. He's been imprisoned for the last 2 years. More than half of the imprisoned journalists are Kurdish. How Turkey treats its Kurdish citizens has been one of the most sensitive issues for decades.
Dişi Hanım merhaba, Selin ben BBC'den, nasılsınız?
Dilşat Deniz talks me through the case against her younger brother Hüseyin. She maintains he is a journalist, nothing more. This is Hüseyin's yellow press card, a government-accredited press card. Hüseyin is the Berlin correspondent for a leftist Turkish newspaper. But he used to be the editor of a pro-Kurdish paper 7 years ago.
I really feel sad and sometimes angry for my brother. In Turkey, people made to think that if someone asking for some rights, this is something that some people are sort of enemy of your country. This kind of climate is, I think, this so dangerous in this country.
For Hüseyin's sisters and lawyer, the charge that he is a member of a terrorist organization is, they say, ridiculous.
Terrorist acts is something related to violence, because you cannot show the violence. I mean, writing or talking about the Kurdish issue is not terrorism, even you don't like the idea maybe. But you cannot call it as terrorism because he's just writing or she's just writing it, just taking pictures.
Censorship can be felt even in the furthest corners of the country. I'm traveling towards Reyhanlı, a border town in southern Turkey. We are like meters away from the Syrian border. This town is rebuilding. In May 2013, Reyhanlı was rocked by 2 explosions, seen by many as retaliation for Turkey's interference in the civil war in Syria. "53 people died. 17-year-old student Oğulcan Tuna was one of them.
İşte cesetlerin içerisinden oğlumu buldum. Postanın kapısının önünde yatmış, uzanmış. Benim aslanım, yiğidim.
Daha 17 yaşındaydı.
17 yaşında. Beyni dağılıktı. Ben o beyni kendilerinden topladım.
A local court banned the media from broadcasting coverage of what was one of the deadliest attacks on Turkish soil. The Prime Minister spoke in support of the ban.
Basının sansürün olayından ben utanç duyuyorum. Ya, yanlış bir şey. Ya şimdi sen televizyonları kapatabilirsin. Ya bu internet var, insanlar oradan daha canlısını seyrediyor. Eğer biz demokrasiden bahsediyorsak, demokrasilerde yasakçılık zihniyeti olmaz. Hiçbir zaman olmadı. Basın görevini yapacak, gelecek, buradaki olayları insanlar aydınlatacak, ucu kime dokunursa dokunsun peşini bırakmayacak. Basının görevi bu.
This crisis in journalism is part of a wider polarization in Turkish society. Supporters of the government welcome the economic progress the country has made and Turkey's aspiration to be a regional power. But for many young urban liberal people, the government's brand of Islamic conservatism is bringing unwanted intrusion into their lives. there have been restrictions on the sale of alcohol and plans to ban mixed-sex university accommodation. There's even censorship at football matches. These hardcore fans of Beşiktaş would normally be at the stadium tonight, but the men have been locked out of this game.
Turkish football fans are always a passionate, noisy crowd, but since the protests back in the summer, they're getting increasingly political too.
At the 34th minute at every game since the summer protests, these fans begin a political chant. They mean they will keep on protesting against the government everywhere at every opportunity. But you wouldn't hear this protest if you were watching the game at home. When the chanting in the stadium starts, the Turkish broadcaster switches off the sound. And the fans raise a glass sarcastically to the Prime Minister's restrictive alcohol policy. You'll find almost no criticism of Mr. Erdoğan or his government here. Kasımpaşa is a poorer, conservative district of Istanbul. It is also where the Prime Minister grew up.
Just walking around this neighborhood, you have a sense of how popular Mr. Erdoğan is. Here is a picture of him back 40 years ago. All around there are pictures of him in every shop.
His friend of 40 years, Hayri Engin, used to be a neighbor.
İstedikleri kadar eleştirsinler, indiremezler o adamı. Tayyip Erdoğan'ı kesinlikle indiremezler. 100 yılda yaşayacağını bilsem yine oyun Tayyip Erdoğan atarım.
Hayri thinks Turkish papers write as freely as in any European country. He says opposition journalists go too far.
O zaman üsluplarından gitsinler. Üsluplarını değerlendirsinler, kendilerini değiştirsinler.
Gazeteciler.
Gazeteciler. Avrupa'da yaşayan gazetecilere, televizyon ekiplerine bakın. Bir de bizim Türkiye'deki patron ne derse onu yapıyor. Vur abalıya. Aç çamur izi kalsın, başka bir şeyleri yok.
Many share this view in Turkey. But the government does not want to talk about press freedom right now. At least, not to the BBC.
I've made repeated requests to several government ministers and the Prime Minister himself for interviews to let them have a chance to defend their case, their position. But none of them, it seems, are willing to talk. And it feels like the government is ready to criticize journalists, but not as willing to answer direct questions.
These meetings of the families of people who disappeared during Turkey's dirty wars of the past will go on every Saturday until the hidden truths are exposed. For investigative journalist Ahmet Şık, the struggle continues to reveal the stories that have been buried in Turkey.
1990'ın sonunda başladım mesleğe. Yani o günden bugüne 20 yıldan fazla bir zaman geçti. Türkiye demokratikleşme anlamında evet hakkını verelim, pozitif anlamda bir takım değişimlere de maruz kaldı. Ama medyanın özgürlüğü konusunda, ifade özgürlüğü, basın özgürlüğü konusunda da giderek bir ters orantıya da geriye dönüş var. Şu an haber yapmanın çok güç olduğu bir dönemde. Ben Türkiye'deki demokrasi mücadelesini iğneyle kuyu kazmak diye tanımlıyorum. Kendi adıma bir şey istemiyorum. Bunu çok samimiyetle söylüyorum. Kendi çocuğumun böyle bir şey yetişkin bir birey olduğunda bunları yaşamasını istemediğim için bir kavga bu. Ya da doğmamış çocuklarımız için.
As for Taksim Square in the center of Istanbul, everything is calm now. Little evidence of the social earthquake from the summer or its aftershocks.
What happened here is so symbolic of the fault lines in Turkey. There's a generation wanting to be heard, there's a government refusing to listen, and the media afraid to do its job. In a real democracy, journalists should not be punished for telling the truth. Turkey needs a fundamental shift in the understanding of journalism's role in society. It can no longer be a propaganda tool, but must be seen for what it should be, an indispensable pillar of democracy.